Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Hot Topics in Environmental Law Summer Lecture Series. I'm Kevin Jones. I direct our Institute for Energy and the Environment here at Vermont Law and Graduate School. Make sure you get that new full name in there. We're pleased to welcome you to the presentation today. Each talk that we have is worth 1 Vermont CLE credit. So if you're interested in those, please keep track of which talks you attend for your records. Please hold your questions, and we'll have time for Q&A after today's presentation. Around 12:45, we'll break for questions, have about 10 minutes. For those of you watching on VLGS YouTube or Facebook, you may enter your questions in the chat or comment space, and we'll get through as many as we can. I'm super excited today that we have Maya Earls with us. Today, Maya is a reporter with the legal intelligence team at Bloomberg Industry Group, and I was just mentioning to Maya, one of my favorite things about the summers are summer media fellows. Very big welcome to VLGS. Maya primarily focuses on environmental cases at the federal level, covering disputes over oil and gas leasing, water pollution, and species protection. When she's not at work, she spends her time watching and playing soccer, enjoying the outdoors, and exploring local eateries. Hopefully you have some time for that while you're in Vermont. Maya joins us this summer as a VLGS Summer Media Fellow, selected from a highly competitive pool of applicants. Today, she'll present on lithium versus buckwheat, when renewable energy goals run up against species protection laws. I'm super excited in the topic. Please join me in welcoming Maya Earls.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today virtually. I hope that you find this useful. It makes you think a little bit, and I just want to thank you again for joining today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start with the presentation. And as Kevin said, today I'm going to be talking about lithium and buckwheat, and how the Endangered Species Act was used to protect this wildflower that's at the site of this proposed lithium mine. And what I'd like is, for anyone watching and listening to think about kind of what our obligations are to the natural world, and how we find a balance with the human relationship and with our relationship and what our obligations are for other species. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start with explaining what lithium is and why we care about it. Lithium is what's making this presentation possible today. It's found in cell phones, laptops. It's also used in pacemakers. And it's a key ingredient of rechargeable batteries, which is what is key to electric vehicles. The issue right now is that the US produces less than 2% of the global supply of lithium. This was as of May, according to PBS.org. And so one of the solutions is mining within the US and increasing US production. So I'll take you to what this lawsuit was about, which is Ioneer's plan to develop the Rhyolite Ridge Lithium Boron project. This project, they're planning to spend about $800 million to tap into Rhyolite Ridge, which is located in Esmeralda County in Nevada. This area is said to hold the largest known lithium and boron deposit in North America. And I spoke with Ioneer's executive chairman, James Calloway, who explained that one of the goals is to produce enough lithium to supply about 400,000 electric cars annually for the next 30 years or so. And so one of the issues with this plan is that the mine, as it's currently located and what the original plan for its location, could wipe out Team's buckwheat, which is pictured here, a very vibrant yellow wildflower. And so the Center for Biological Diversity, which is a nonprofit that regularly takes legal action to protect species, said that the mine as originally planned could wipe out this species. And right now, the wildflower has only been found at this site in Rhyolite Ridge area. And one of the main reasons that we know about this wildflower and where it's located and how it relates to the mine is because of Dan Patterson, who worked at the Bureau of Land Management, and he accused the agency of ignoring its environmental responsibilities and fast-track projects on federal land. Part of the reason we know about this is because of a whistleblower complaint that was obtained by Politico and type investigations. And he actually filed a complaint in October 2019 that accuses the agency of ignoring responsibilities, which the Bureau of Land Management disputed. But Patterson, who used to work at the Center for Biological Diversity, he tipped them off about Rhyolite Ridge and about the project. This is also according to a Politico article. And he just asked them, what do you know about this? And this kind of started this whole legal battle that's going to be the focus today. Part of the legal battle has a mystery element to it. Sometime in the summer of 2020, about 17,000 plants, which is a little more than 40% of the population of Teams Buckwheat, was damaged or just disappeared. And this image is from the Center of Biological Diversity's complaint. And the legal complaint is saying that the Bureau of Land Management it says the Fish and Wildlife Service was failing to meet its obligations under the Endangered Species Act to protect the species. And so at the time, the reason they included this image was that there's even fewer amounts of this species that is available. And the Center for Biological Diversity said that there was evidence of human presence in the areas where the buckwheat was removed, but Nevada officials and Ioneer both say that rodents were responsible. So I can't give you the answer as to what really happened, but I can say that the lawsuit alleged a violation of the Endangered Species Act, the Administrative Procedure Act, and they essentially said that the Fish and Wildlife Service failed to act on the group's petition to list the species and also failed to provide a final decision on another request by the group to emergency list the species. They're saying that right now, because of the mine and because of this destruction, an emergency exists to act now and not go through the lengthy process of deciding whether or not listing the species is warranted. So I want to kind of take a second to go into what the Endangered Species Act says and what it requires the Fish and Wildlife Service to do. So the agency, the process is submitting a petition to decide whether listing a species is warranted or not warranted, and whether to list a species as endangered or threatened. And the agency has to act within 90 days of receiving a petition. And so it has to do an initial decision within 90 days, and then a final decision is due within a year. Emergency listing, the difference between that and filing a regular petition is that emergency listing ensures immediate protection, but it's also temporary. The idea is to make a final decision soon. So emergency listing expires in 240 days. So that's one aspect of what the agencies are required to do. Agencies are also required, as part of their decision on whether to list the species, whether it's endangered or threatened, they have to make a critical habitat determination. So this is kind of setting what the boundaries are as to where, what area should we also protect and designate as critical habitat. And the one key about this is that there is an exclusion. So, for example, if the benefit of not including this part of area as critical habitat outweighs inclusion, then this is something that the agency can consider. But there's a caveat. So unless it results in the extinction of the species, that kind of weighing of whether the benefit outweighs the cost, it cannot result in the extinction of a species. So this is kind of what's going on in this area, what the lawsuit's about, and what the law says. But I do want to talk about why do we even care about the buckwheat? As I said in the beginning, lithium is a metal that's used in has a lot of different uses. It's key to the federal government's goal to produce more lithium within North America and within the US, and to pursue more renewable energy options and go for greener electric cars. And the buckwheat, there's a lot we don't know about it, but it's still worth protection. And this was told to me by Naomi S. Fraga. She's the director of conservation programs at the California Botanic Garden. She's also a research assistant professor at Claremont Graduate University. So I spoke with her at length about this issue. She's a botanist. She has a lot of experience dealing with species and studying them. And she explained to me that one of the reasons why the buckwheat is unique is because of its limited distribution. So how spread out it is and how many numbers that it has, but also the specific habitat. I mean, we're talking about Nevada, we're talking about an area that's rich with mineral deposits and metals. And so the soil needs a very specific type of environment and very, unique place for a wildflower like the buckwheat to survive. And there needs to be more research and understanding as to how the buckwheat lives here. What are the ways that it can survive, and but also it doesn't exist in isolation, as she told me. There's a whole ecosystem there. There are other species that rely on the buckwheat, or that could rely on the buckwheat, and we just don't know enough about the role that it plays, just know enough about it. So with that in mind, one of the things that she emphasized to me, and that I think it's important to reflect, is the idea that if we value life, we need to value all diversity of life, plants included. And part of the reason is that plants are foundational to everything. They're foundational to medicines, to materials. And, one question that she brought to me is, or kind of a hypothetical was, why are humans arbiters of the species? Why, who are we to pick and choose what deserves to exist on this planet? So with that in mind, and with these ideas of why to protect it, I'm going to talk next about, what are options at the site to protect the species. So again, going back to my conversation with Mr. Calloway at Ioneer, he says that they're highly confident that they can transplant the plants, so kind of pick them up and move them out of the mine site. And he emphasized that they're doing a lot of research into the species, and he said that they're excited to show how to do this right, how to develop a project while also keeping the needs of different species in mind. So this is what he says. But again, going back to what Fraga said, I asked her, can this type of thing work? And one of the issues is that we know so little about the species that it's really difficult. And she even went further to say it might be even naive to say that we can replicate the current ecosystem, even if it's a few hundred yards away. Pollinators aren't easily replicated. So going back to the case, So there was some success here. The case is largely procedural. Did the Fish and Wildlife Service follow procedure? Did it act in a timely manner on their petition to list the species? And Judge James C. Mahan said no, and they didn't act within a timely manner, and he ordered the agency to act, but he found that the group couldn't petition the agency to emergency list the species. That just isn't something that groups can do. That's more under agency discretion. So there was some success, some for the group, and the Fish and Wildlife Service said in October of 2021 that it would list the species as endangered. It also designated, or it said that it would designate 910 acres as critical habitat, and that there would be a 500-meter protective buffer. This is less of a smaller area than requested by the Center for Biological Diversity. They sought a 1-mile barrier, but this is some progress. So I want to talk about kind of what comes next. So Ioneer said in February that, this, even though the ruling was that we're going to move forward with protecting the species, and that protecting the species could impact the company's plans to develop its mine, Ioneer still says it supports the Fish and Wildlife Service's efforts to protect the species. Again, they were looking into ways to move it. They already said that they build up their own protective barriers to prevent rodents from, or anything else from getting to the wildflowers. And they said that this new development has no material impact on their planned mining activities. And I do want to emphasize that they're still in the beginning stages of this process. They still need to get permits from the federal government and the state. They still need environmental reviews. So while this may or may not be one setback or maybe one hurdle, it's still ongoing. And I do want to say that the agency said it proposed to list the species, but it has yet to finalize its proposal. So again, going back to the procedure, finalizing, it has a 1-year deadline. So they said 2022 that we're going to propose to list the species, but a final decision is due by 2023. If they delay this decision, that could bring an opening for another lawsuit. Or if they issue the final rule and there's something that maybe the rule or the buffer zone in the critical habitat designation isn't as extensive as conservation groups like the Center for Biological Diversity say they are, then this could be another opportunity, a legal opportunity, or not, more like an opening for future lawsuits. But again, we will see. The final rule is due in 2023. But there are a lot of things to consider and a lot of things to learn from this case. So this case on its face was kind of a straightforward Endangered Species Act case. Groups sue agencies often for their delay in making Endangered Species Act decisions. But I think the thing that makes this case stands out is because this endangered species is located where, lithium is, and where this one ingredient of potentially addressing emissions and all these things that contribute to climate change are. And so I think that it's definitely worth keeping in mind that the agency has to make decisions and that there are still many unknowns with the plant. But I do want to go back and kind of talk about where to draw the line under the Endangered Species Act. So agencies, as they're making this decision and as groups comment on their decision-making process, it could be that making the designation, they have to decide, will the benefits of including this area of critical habitat outweigh the costs or the drawbacks. And they could decide that, well, yes, we have to make this designation because otherwise the wildflower could go extinct. Or they could say, you know, maybe putting this critical habitat buffer around will not, it won't put the species at risk of extinction, and it'll also serve our needs as far as getting materials to support renewable energy goals. So that's one thing to think about. But I'd also like to raise a question, and maybe for future discussion, is should we even try to think about balancing human needs and the needs of species, especially in the context of climate change and in the context of renewable energy, and the idea that we could be putting kind of the goals of preventing harms for our species, largely self-inflicted harms, above the needs of, you know, plants and animals. So that's something that I think is worth considering, especially as we move forward, because while this is one small step of the process, there's still other parts of the mining process that are ongoing. But also, this isn't just about it isn't just about the mine in isolation. So we have the mine here, but there are future renewable energy projects that are popping up all the time. We're talking about wind. The US is definitely going to try and expand mining. And also we have to think about solar and hydro projects. All these projects could have impacts, and they could put endangered species at risk, or put species at risk that deserve protection. And so the question is, you know, how far do we go in pursuing our renewable energy goals, and will we keep species in mind? So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I will definitely be keeping an eye on this case, or on this issue as it develops. Like I said, a final agency decision is due by 2023. If there is a delay, there could be more litigation. There are also other permits in the works. So one of the permits is one under the National Environmental Policy Act, which requires a consideration of the effects of a project. So it could be possible that the mine's effect on this wildflower again comes up there. But long story short, this isn't over, and there will be a lot of difficult decisions up ahead. So I think that's all that I have at this point. And I want to thank everyone for joining, and I'm definitely looking forward to discussion and answering any questions that anyone has on this issue.
There, I've got myself unmuted now. Thank you, Maya. To me, it's a super important topic, and one that in the classroom and elsewhere we've obviously encountered and thought a lot about here at VLS. While we're waiting for some other questions from the audience, I just have a couple for you. One is, you know, to me, kind of an important question about this, and one of the other endangered species issues has been around the sage grouse, which you probably seen some of the discussion there. And to me, it's particularly challenging because, you know, historically we've had concerns about protecting the sage grouse from development from things that maybe the environmental community and the clean energy community are supportive of in terms of oil and gas development. But I think more recently we've seen some issues in terms of wind development. And I just wonder if you could comment, you know, for a few minutes on thoughts or concerns of differentiating and saying, you know, when it comes from industry or maybe advocacy groups, maybe how we undermine our environmental laws when we don't hold the same standards when it's a technology that we support versus a technology that maybe we oppose.
Yeah, that's another important thing. And I think that one of the key things to keep in mind is that the law, the Endangered Species Act, doesn't say, you know, well, renewable energy stuff is preferred or anything like that. So if we're going strictly on what the law says, and if courts do the same, then and judges do the same, then ideally the sage grouse would be protected. And I mean, it would be protected against some of these projects either way. And I do want to note that that sage grouse do have Endangered Species Act protections already, which is does make it a little bit more difficult to put forth projects that'll threaten it, no matter what project it is. And the Teams Buckwheat doesn't have, they have proposed protections, but they're, as of now, they're not fully protected under the act. And I think that, there could have been a chance that we wouldn't have known anything if not for whistleblowers or for people who spoke up about this one small wildflower. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. We have a question. So the question is, if we zoom out to the global level, how does the site's environmental and species impacts compare to other lithium sites?
Yeah, so I think that on a species impacts compared to other lithium sites, I think that this site is a little unique in the sense that the wildflower is only located there. So if we go to other lithium sites, I just have yet to see another issue where there's a plant or there's something that's only found there. I think what you were saying about sage grouse, is kind of an example where it's not a lithium site, but it is somewhere where sage grouse exist and where protecting them has taken precedence over moving forward with certain projects, or it has resulted in limiting certain projects. So I think taking one of the things is that, kind of as I said earlier, there just isn't that much lithium development in the US. So I think it's definitely possible as development expands, then we could see more potential impacts and more legal challenges. I think if we talk about a global level, most of the lithium development is in countries such as China and other countries where the environmental species laws maybe not be as, they might not be as stringent, or there might be, just differences in the law. So I think that when it comes to lithium in the US, right now, this issue is unique just because of where the wildflower is, but we could see another, repeat future projects kind of running into species issues.
Thank you. I'm just curious, obviously from the mining industry, maybe the incentive is to kind of plow forward and fight the listing and reduce costs. But obviously there are other industries that are associated with this, particularly, if we were looking at the, historically, like you said, our laptop, batteries, Apple and Microsoft certainly don't want us to think that buying their products necessarily will result in eliminating a species, and particularly as we go into the clean energy technologies, now some of the more traditional companies, General Motors, Ford, or Tesla, I wouldn't think would want to be seen as promoting policies that they want us to think good, feel good about driving their electric vehicles, and it's good for the planet. And they don't want us to be thinking, well, it might be good for the climate change, but oops, we wiped out a species as a result of this. So I'm just curious if there have been any efforts by the proponents of protecting this wildflower to try to bring those other players into the debate and have them push back maybe against the mining industry a little bit.
Yes, and that's a good suggestion. I think that what we've seen in maybe other legal issues such as clean air or clean water, I think clean air specifically, we'll see, and when it comes to regulating emissions from vehicles, there has been some industry support there. I'm thinking of recent emissions laws where there have been some support with car industries, but I think when it comes to mining and some other renewable energy issues, we haven't seen as much company involvement, and I'm not quite sure as to why. And I think that that could be something that the group looks into and support. I think for this rule to list a species that's pending, there is a period of public comment, and I haven't been monitoring all of the public comments, but there could be some support in there from other industries. But for one reason or another, we just haven't seen like car companies like Tesla, or we just haven't seen them involved in, I guess, the legal side. We haven't seen any briefs in support or anything like that yet. And I will say, going back to the sage grouse issue, which is very similar, there, at least there's a lot of opposition from oil and gas companies to some of the issues over drilling. And as far as the issue of developing wind power, I can expect that there would be opposition for who's ever developing the project, but and who could be impacted by sage grouse. But I don't know. I think that's a good point, but we haven't seen that much activity or involvement either for or against when it comes to lithium development. So, maybe we'll see more in the future. Especially, I think the Endangered Species Act issue is pending, but like I said, there are other permits pending, and if the other permits bring about litigation, then that could be that chance where we see these car companies step in and file briefs support or against. So we'll see.
One of the things that I've heard a lot from some of the students here is, the question of, all the virgin lithium that's being mined for these products, but not a lot of focus on kind of the recycling side of things. So has that entered into the debate at all? Is that relevant in terms of whether there's options that industry's not pursuing in terms of other alternatives to obtaining lithium?
Okay, so like kind of recycling lithium already. Yeah, that's something that I haven't seen as much effort for yet. I will say, just recycling in general has been a very fraught issue, and we're still kind of dealing with the aftermaths of plastic recycling, and there are lawsuits about that, and whether companies knew that plastic recycling wouldn't be as effective, or that their products could be recyclable. So I think that when it comes to like metal recycling, that still seems to be in the newer stages, and I'm just not seeing as much emphasis as that being a solution to mining less. Just haven't seen that out there.
I'll just remind everyone we still have some time if we want to get questions in. So get them out into the chat. I'm curious, Maya, do you have any thoughts for us for future? Where do you see this? Where do you see this going? Do you have any predictions about this a rather beautiful wildflower?
Sure. So I think that we could see. So one of the things when the agency finalizes its decision to list the species is that so the Fish and Wildlife Service next year will need to decide whether listing Teams Buckwheat is warranted, whether it's not warranted, or whether it's warranted, but there are other listing decisions that take more priority. And the last one is kind of a big concern because, well, at least a concern for those interested in protecting the buckwheat, because there are a lot of listing decisions that are pending, and that, kind of what I said earlier about this being more of run-of-the-mill lawsuit on its face is that the Fish and Wildlife Service has faced many lawsuits over its delays and over its process of listing a species. In fact, there was a lawsuit filed last year that said that the backlog of listing species is the greatest that it's ever been, and so so there could be a possibility that when next year arrives for a final decision, the agency could say, yes, protecting the species is warranted, but we have other decisions ahead of us. And so I don't know if that necessarily gives Ioneer the green light to kind of go ahead, but there is, emergency listing decision in place. There is, there is like a proposal to set this barrier in place. So there are some kind of protections that are in place right now, but whether or not they'll be in place after the final decision comes is another question. I think that part of the reason that I was emphasizing that the process is ongoing and that permits are ongoing is that if the agency says, yes, we're going to list this species as endangered or as threatened, it is protected under the Endangered Species Act. This means that, one of the parts of the permitting process is going through NEPA. So this is environmental review process. And so agencies would have to consider, like, we have an endangered species at this site. It has protections, can this project go forward, or will it put this endangered species at risk? And so that's really a key part of this, because the endangered species listing in itself isn't really something that could hold back a project. It's more of, when it comes to permitting a project, is there a species that is protected, and will this project harm the species? That's something that agencies have to consider. So that's a key aspect of this. And if it's listed, if during the process agencies say that we have a listed species here and building will harm it and we're going to reject permit, then that could be what stops the project. Or they could say, we're not going to reject the permit, but we may have some mitigating factors. It could make it more expensive to build in that area, or it could just change the project plan. I think those are the things that we could see happening in the future. And like I said, Ioneer is very hopeful. They want this project to move forward, and they put a lot of money and a lot of their own scientific experts to find a way to make this move forward without harming the species. And like I said earlier, they're very confident that they're going about this the right way. So we will see, but I think that if they are listed and if this is part of the review process, it could change the plans for sure.
Great. A final question for you to kind of go back to to the center of the program you're in here with our Media Fellows program. Obviously, the role that you play in your organization, like Bloomberg Law, in terms of educating not only those of us that are interested, deeply interested in these topics, but the general public about the environmental impacts from these technologies is incredibly important. And so many people wouldn't understand about the threats to things such as this wildflower without the excellent work that you're doing. Do you have any thoughts on how those of us that are kind of the environmental law and policy experts or advocates can help members of the media like yourself do your job better, so that we can make sure that we have good public policies in place and people are aware of the environmental impacts of the policies that we have today?
That's a good question. I think that I think one thing that would help sometimes, and especially with a lot of these cases, is that there are a lot of procedural issues or kind of really technicalities where, and I'm guilty of the same thing. It's, you've been doing it so long that um, it kind of comes second nature to you. And so, and one thing I really appreciate right now is that I get the chance to speak with these groups and talk with them and really break down into layman's terms. What does it mean when this happens? What does it mean when an agency says something is warranted but precluded by another action? What is a critical habitat designation? Some of these are Google searches, but other times it really helps to speak with someone or for them to send this information when they announce a lawsuit is filed or when a decision happens. All of these things are super helpful because the more I understand and the more we can break down into the heart of the matter, the easier it is to explain to the public as to why it matters and what these issues are. And I think that especially, I mean, one of the ways that this happened was because someone who was within the agency felt that the agency wasn't doing something that they were supposed to, which was taking a deep dive into looking at these projects and looking at their impacts. And he notified the group, which took legal action. And I think that one of the benefits is that the group has a lot of, I'm talking about the Center for Biological Diversity, they have the resources to go through and really fight for species. And it's not just Team Buckwheat. There's sage-grouse issues, there are issues with marine species. And so and it's hard because there are a million species out there, but taking the time to fight for the different species and focus on these projects, and I think all of that is kind of helpful. And also I think it's helpful to understand kind of a deeper look at what the impacts of these projects are. A lot of times I like to always talk to the companies, understand what they're developing and understand what the process is and what's going on there, and get their kind of views on what their benefits of the project are, what the benefits are. But I also like to kind of understand too, like, what are some of the drawbacks? Why are we filing this lawsuit? Why are we pursuing this action? I think that all just really helps, just providing more information and just communication. And so, I can definitely see, future lawsuits kind of like this coming about, where there might be a renewable energy project or something. And, even though it has the benefits associated with renewable energy, there could be some other drawbacks. So just as part of, I guess, the advocacy work, kind of explaining what they are and really kind of breaking it down. It's all just very helpful. And as we move forward, it's something I'll definitely be keeping an eye on. So.
Great. Well, Maya, thank you very much. Really have appreciated you educating us on these super important issues, and really happy that you were here with us at Vermont Law and Graduate School for the next couple of weeks, so we can continue to interact with you. And I want to thank our audience for being there today, and remind everyone we do this Tuesdays and Thursdays throughout the summer. So join us for Hot Topics lectures in the future. So a big thanks to Maya and to those of you that have been viewing today.
Yep. Thank you for having me.